The horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing techniques sparked a historic U.S. production boom that lowered consumer prices, boosted the economy, and changed geopolitics. It made the United States the world's largest oil producer a few years ago, but until recently, the United States was still importing millions of barrels per day from other countries, particularly Russia. The U.S. Energy Information Administration, EIA, estimated that in 2020, America would produce 18.4 million barrels of oil per day and consume 18.12 million. Yet, according to the same research, the U.S. has been importing 7.86 million barrels of oil per day in recent years. In 2021, the U.S. exported 8.63 million barrels per day of petroleum to 176 nations and 4 U.S. territories. Why does the U.S. still import crude oil and refined products? And while they are still importing oil, why do they export domestic crude, especially when prices have risen at the pump? Why don't they just keep American oil at home? So let's explain it. Although oil is a global commodity, hardly anyone directly consumes it. It has to be refined into the fuels, feedstocks, materials, and goods we buy and consume every day. This means that physical variables such as where oil is produced or where refining or manufacturing factories are located, as well as the location of the largest customer demand, have an impact on its utility and thus overall value. At the same time, different types of oil are required to make different products, and despite the rapid increase in domestic oil production, major sections of the oil produced in the United States may not be sufficient to make all of the items that Americans use. This emphasizes the importance of flexibility in international oil trading, marketing supplies to global customers that may not meet local requirements, in unlocking the United States' productive potential. For these and other reasons, keeping American oil at home and opting out of the global petroleum market is neither possible nor in the country's best interests. Let's look at some of the factors, as these might help you to have a clear understanding of our discussion on why America needs to export crude and refined oil products. 1. Oil location. Geographically, oil production, refining, and demand may differ. Because much of the infrastructure needed to produce, refine, and transport fuels is located in the mid-continent and the U.S. Gulf Coast regions, the United States continues to import crude oil and finished products. Many states with significant motor fuel demand, on the other hand, lack such infrastructure and rely on shipping, rail, and trucks to get their fuel. Florida, Oregon, and New England are great examples of states that rely largely on more expensive modes of transportation and imports. 2. Quality. Along the Gulf Coast, 700 million barrels of oil are kept in deep salt caverns. That's nearly a month's worth of food for the entire country. President Joe Biden has already authorized the discharge of oil from that reserve on 2 occasions, but it has had little impact in the long run. Russia is one of the world's top oil exporters, although it only accounts for roughly 8% of U.S. oil imports. Russian oil makes up roughly 3.36% of the 20 million barrels of oil used by the United States each day. However, that 8% is still significant in its own way. Many refineries in the United States were actually built before the domestic oil boom that made America the world's largest producer. The majority of the oil produced in the United States today is lighter, sweeter crude, which flows faster and has lower sulfur levels than many other sorts. The problem is that many refineries in the United States were built decades ago and were designed for the heavier, sulfur-rich crudes that were typical at the time. Most of the refineries in the United States are more economically efficient when using heavy, sour crudes sourced from other countries. When oil prices rise, the United States cannot simply pump more crude to lower them. Drilling is the only option to dramatically increase production. After years of boom and bust cycles, followed by demand drops during the coronavirus epidemic, oil corporations have been both reluctant to invest money and short on employees. Thus, importing crude oil and refined products may sound more feasible in this scenario. When oil prices rise dramatically around the world, big oil-producing countries like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are able to protect their citizens. They keep some spare capacity or oil pumping capability that can be turned on and off within 6 months for geological and political reasons. They regard fossil fuel production as a national security issue, and they control it accordingly. However, when it comes to fossil resources, the United States does not follow this strategy. The federal government makes no claim to oil or gas under private property. It lacks the ability to immediately enhance or limit drilling through legislation. When America genuinely dominated the global oil sector in the early half of the 20th century, one government in the United States was able to determine worldwide pricing in the same way that the Gulf Plus cartel does today. Surprisingly, this occurred at the state level. The Texas Railroad Commission is in charge of opening and closing the state's powerful taps. The commission's ability to set prices has dwindled as Texas's easy-to-reach resources have dried up. Modern horizontal fracking wells, which take 6 to 8 months to produce their first drop of oil, now supply Texas oil. That means that, in the current state of the U.S. oil industry, there is no way to ramp up new oil output in a matter of weeks or even months. 4. Refining is a complex process. The refining system in the United States operates 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, to generate the fuels and goods that Americans consume on a daily basis. But since refining is a complex process, Saudi Arabia, who has been a reliable crude oil supplier to U.S. refiners for decades, will continue to export the crude oil as well as refined products to the U.S. market, even in the future. 5. Decisions in the U.S. oil market. Well, this one can be the most important factor. Unlike in some other countries where government-controlled national oil firms dominate oil production, refining, trade, and marketing, the United States has a diverse range of privately owned companies doing these services. The scale and nature of the U.S. oil trade, as well as its change over time, are the consequence of several decisions made by a diverse group of U.S. oil firms in response to domestic and global market possibilities and needs. Although these firms are subject to state and federal rules in the United States, and their decisions are influenced by them, there is no centralized control or direction of oil imports and exports in the country. Now, let's have a look on how Democratic and Republican energy policies have affected the import and export of crude oil in the U.S. President Donald Trump announced the United States' withdrawal from the Paris Agreement in 2017, citing a desire to increase domestic oil production and attain energy independence. 4 million acres of federal land were leased to fossil fuel firms during his term. Trump also resurrected the Keystone XL pipeline, which has bipartisan support in Congress. Then in 2020, the world was jolted by the advent of COVID-19, a new coronavirus disease that quickly spread throughout the globe. Oil demand fell sharply as a result of the response measures, which included stay-at-home orders. Due to low demand, U.S. oil output fell again during the pandemic. Things changed drastically again when President Joe Biden was elected in 2021, promising to take bold action on climate change. He re-entered the Paris Agreement, committing to reduce U.S. emissions by at least half from 2005 levels by 2030 and to attain net zero emissions by 2050. Biden proposed, among other things, a return to stricter fuel economy standards for cars and trucks, as well as policies to encourage the use of electric vehicles. Biden canceled the Keystone XL pipeline and put drilling leases in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge on hold. Drilling permits for other federal lands, on the other hand, are being granted at an unprecedented rate. As the pandemic in the United States fades, demand for oil picks up, and gas prices soar to a 7-year high. Now let's have a look at the current state of the U.S. oil market. The invasion of Ukraine by Russia has wreaked havoc on global energy prices. Biden halted shipments of Russian oil into the United States, and Western sanctions forced energy businesses to leave the country. Oil prices, which had been climbing in the aftermath of the pandemic, have now reached their highest point since 2008. The U.S. legislators on both sides of the aisle are calling for increased domestic oil production in reaction to near-record gasoline prices, yet others in Congress are pushing for a faster transition to renewable energy. The United States and other International Energy Agency members have also announced plans to release 60 million barrels of oil from strategic reserves. Meanwhile, the Biden administration is considering mending harsh ties with Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela in the hopes of increasing oil supplies. For the first time since 2019, senior U.S. officials visited Caracas as the Biden administration worked to complete discussions on renewing the 2015 Iran nuclear deal and removing U.S. sanctions on Tehran. As a result, the latest war situation has added to the uncertainty that has gripped the world's energy markets. So, what are your views on this? Can the U.S. increase oil fast enough to offset Russian imports? Or would the U.S. be able to combat huge oil price hikes, which is expected in near days? Do share your answers in the comments section below. And if you found this video informative and enjoyed the content, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the like button, as we frequently upload such informative videos. Thank you for watching.